The early morning light filtered through the narrow alleyways of Plaka, casting golden shadows over the cobbled streets of old Athens. The sound of cicadas hummed in the background, blending with the distant echo of chatter from the nearby market square. This was the city's heart, where past and present coexisted, but for me, it was just another morning filled with dread. My name is Nikos. I was 17, quiet, and unremarkable in most ways. I blended in easily with the crowd, which is what I thought would keep me safe. But it never did. The courtyard of my school, just north of the Acropolis, was buzzing with students preparing for the day. The marble steps were cracked from time, worn by the soles of countless generations. Yet every crack, every corner, held a memory I wished I could erase. That was where I saw them. Costas and his friends. They weren't the kind of bullies who shouted in public. No. They were clever, patient, and precise. Like cats playing with their food. Costas, with his olive skin and tousled dark hair, was always at the center of the group. His smile never reached his eyes. I felt their gaze long before they approached. My shoulders tensed, my steps slowed. I made for the library wing, hoping the bell would save me. It didn't. Where are you off to, philosopher? Costas sneered as he blocked the path. Behind him, Andreas laughed, while Myron cracked his knuckles theatrically. I stayed quiet. Silence had always been my armor. If I gave them nothing, perhaps they'd lose interest. But silence also made them crueler. Cack out your tongue again, Nikos? Costas leaned in. Or are you just practicing for your monastic life? He pushed me, not hard, just enough to show control. I stumbled back, bumping into the stone column behind me. My books spilled across the steps. I didn't bend to pick them up. That made him pause. For a brief moment, his smirk faltered. Something had changed. I didn't know it then, but that morning was the beginning of the end. Not of the bullying, not yet, but of the fear that ruled my life. And all it started with was silence. That afternoon, the sky over Athens turned a dull gray. Clouds gathered above Mount Lycabettus, smothering the sunlight and casting a sullen glow across the city. It was the kind of sky that made everything feel heavier, more suffocating. I walked home alone, my backpack pressing awkwardly against my spine, filled with books I hadn't dared to open. The bruises didn't show. Not on the skin, at least. But I felt them. Deep, dull aches that lingered behind my ribs and inside my chest. A sort of quiet swelling. Invisible to the eye, but loud in the silence of my room. My house was tucked along the edge of Exarchia, where old walls held stories in their cracks. Inside, my mother was humming softly in the kitchen, preparing fasolata. The scent of garlic and olive oil should have brought comfort, but I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel anything. I slipped past her, up the staircase, and into my room. The door clicked shut like the final sentence in a conversation no one wanted to have. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror. Not a single mark. No blood, no swelling. And yet I looked damaged. Not broken. Not yet. But there was something missing. Something vital. Later that night, as the city buzzed outside my window, I heard the familiar chime of a message. It was from Andreas, one of Costas's lackeys. I hesitated, then opened it. A photo of me, slouched, arms crossed, with a caption underneath. Nikos, the silent monk. Pray for your bones tomorrow. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply stared at it for a long while, then powered off my phone. The next day would come, like every other. And with it, the routine, the cruelty, the aching silence. But something had begun to shift inside me. Not a plan, not even a thought. Just a growing weight behind my eyes and chest, pushing against the wall I'd built. A crack in the dam. And all it needed was one more moment to break. It happened on a Thursday. Not a special day, not a holiday. Just an ordinary day disguised as something harmless. The kind of day you forget unless it burns itself into your memory. And this one did. The bell had just rung for the final lesson. I was heading down the corridor near the gymnasium, a hallway dimly lit and mostly deserted. That's where they waited. Costas, Andreas, Myron. No jokes this time. No slow build-up. Just action. One grabbed my bag. Another shoved me sideways into the lockers. The echo rang down the empty hall like a church bell. Then fists. I tasted blood. My vision blurred. I fell. But I didn't scream. I didn't run. And I didn't fight back. They were confused. I saw it in their eyes. Even between the blows. I was supposed to defend myself. At least flinch. At least beg. But I did none of that. I let them beat me. Not because I gave up. Because I wanted them to see it meant nothing anymore. Not the pain. Not the shame. Not them. When they stopped, panting, fists raw, I was curled on the floor beside the bench. My breath came in shallow gasps. The gym door creaked open behind them. A teacher's voice shouted something sharp and quick. They ran. And I lay there, blinking at the ceiling. For the first time, I felt something else stirring beneath the bruises. Power. Not the kind Costas held, not the kind that came from fear, but the kind that came from choosing how to suffer and how not to hate. I spent the night in hospital. Nothing broken. Just bruises, cuts, and silence. The nurse who cleaned the blood from my mouth didn't ask questions. Maybe she saw this sort of thing too often. Maybe she knew I wouldn't answer. My mother arrived hours later. Her eyes were red. Not from crying. From trying not to cry. She didn't speak much on the way home. Neither did I. The streets outside the taxi window glowed orange under the city lights. Ancient ruins cast shadows over modern lives, as if the gods still watched us from the stones. Back home, she placed tea on the table. I didn't touch it. She placed her hand on mine. I didn't move it. Then she whispered something I never expected. I know. I turned. She looked older than she had the night before. Not in her face, but in her soul. She knew what was happening. Maybe for longer than I'd realized. But you don't have to be made of stone, Nikos, she said. I said nothing. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the city from my window, lights flickering across rooftops. Somewhere, Costas was probably laughing, planning the next move, the next joke, the next punch. But this time, I wasn't afraid. Not because I could stop him, but because he no longer controlled who I was. The next morning, I walked into school as if nothing had happened. The hallways were alive with murmurs. News had spread. I saw the glances. Some curious. Some guilty. None brave. Costas didn't approach me. Neither did Andreas or Myron. Not yet. But their silence shouted louder than any insult. During literature class, Ms. Eleni called on me to read a passage aloud. I hadn't spoken in class in weeks. Still, I opened my mouth and read. My voice cracked, but I kept reading. When I finished, no one clapped. No one mocked me either. That was something. Later that day, I found a note in my locker. Why didn't you fight back? No name. Just the question, scribbled in untidy black ink. It wasn't a taunt. It felt like a genuine question. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. A question for them. A question for me. 3 days passed. Then, just after the last bell, I was sitting beneath the olive tree near the back gate, the one no one used. It was a quiet corner, untouched by noise. Footsteps approached. I looked up. Costas. Alone. He didn't say anything for a while. Just stood there, awkward, shifting his weight. I waited. He finally spoke. You're not scared of me, are you? I blinked once, then shook my head. He scoffed. Not with pride. More like disbelief. Why? He asked. I didn't answer. I wasn't trying to be mysterious. I just didn't know how to explain it in words he'd understand. He sat on the low stone wall, still looking at me. You could have told them. The teachers. Your mom. The police. I shrugged. Would it have changed you? That stopped him cold. For once, his face showed something other than control. Confusion. Regret. Maybe even shame. I don't know why I do it, he mumbled. That was the first honest thing I'd ever heard him say. He didn't return the next day. Nor the next. Rumors spread. Some said he got suspended. Others whispered he'd gone to stay with his uncle in Thessaloniki. I didn't care for the gossip, but something inside me felt unfinished. We'd spoken, briefly, but nothing was resolved. I began to notice other things. Small cruelties in the corridors. Other boys being pushed. Girls laughed at. People shrinking into silence. It wasn't just me. It never had been. That realization came with a price. If I stayed silent now, I became like the others, the ones who watched and did nothing. But what could I do? I wasn't brave. I wasn't strong. I was just awake. Weeks passed. I spoke more in class, ate with others, smiled once or twice. But at night, the weight returned. Sometimes I'd stare at the mirror and ask myself if I'd become someone different, or if I'd simply stopped hiding. The answer wasn't clear. One evening, I walked the streets of Monastiraki alone, watching tourists photograph statues they didn't understand. I passed a boy, younger than me, alone, head down. Behind him, two others followed, laughing, whispering. I stopped, turned, and stepped between them. I said nothing. They paused, then walked away. The boy looked up, confused, frightened, then grateful. He didn't speak either. He didn't have to. One Monday morning, Costas returned. The school buzzed with whispers. He looked different, quieter, thinner. He avoided my gaze all day. But as I packed my bag after last period, he approached me in the corridor. I went to my uncle's, he said. He teaches philosophy. I raised an eyebrow. He made me read Plato, Costas added. It was weirdly annoying. I almost smiled. He looked down at his hands. I'm not good at talking or fixing things, but I'm sorry. There it was. The apology. Not dramatic. Not forced. Real. I nodded. That was enough. Spring came early in Athens that year. The air was warm, the sky wide and blue. The city felt alive. I sat again beneath the olive tree, the same spot where silence had once been my shield. Now it was simply quiet, peaceful. Around me, life continued. Laughter echoed from the classrooms. A dog barked in the distance. I pulled out a worn piece of paper. The note. Why didn't you fight back? I smiled faintly, because the real battle had never been with fists. It was with fear. And fear had lost, not through strength, but through choice, through silence, through compassion, through endurance. That was the pain that freed me.